I get the opportunity every year to kind of open the program out here at the anchor of the Fitzgerald. Moving in itself. But the lantern ceremony, from high wind or no wind, is always a treat for me. And we've talked about things about the laying of the flowers. We've talked about some of the other survivors. We've talked about other shipwrecks. Tonight I'm just going to do a real quick brief bit about the man who the boat was named after. After all, Edmund Fitzgerald was a person. He was a man, and many of us have read the stories. We all know that he was the president of Northwest Mutual Life Insurance, which owned the Fitzgerald, which leased the Fitzgerald. But there was so much more to it. In fact, his son described him as a unique but unassuming man. This can probably be best exemplified in that while he comes from a family of Edmund Fitzgeralds, he's the only one that did not have a middle initial, which is why the boat was simply the Edmund Fitzgerald. He was born a few years before the turn of the last century in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He was born into a maritime family, I think something most people don't realize. His grandfather and his grandfather's 5 brothers were all captains on the Great Lakes. There were at least 2 ships named for the Fitzgerald family, 1 schooner and 1 steamer, prior to the Edmund Fitzgerald taking that name. His grandfather, John, after being a skipper, became the president of the Milwaukee Dry Dock Company. And then his father, William Edmund Fitzgerald, became the first general manager of American Steamship when they took over, or American Shipbuilding, when they took over most of the yards around the Great Lakes in 1899. He spent his boyhood, his father died unfortunately when he was a young boy, about 7 or 8 years old, and he spent his young life in Hurley, Wisconsin, and then he moved back to Milwaukee, where he graduated from one of the local high schools and went on to Yale. He got into the Sheffield School at Yale, which is the science and engineering school there at Yale. So trained as an engineer, trained as a scientist. He did go to World War I. He actually mustered in Chicago, but then was assigned to an artillery unit at Fort Custer here in Michigan. He ended up in France. He ended up in the Moselle River region, where he stayed until the war was over. He was probably only there for 6 or 8 months. Came back and became an iron founder with Northwest Malleable Iron, not Northwest Insurance. Married at the age of 20, had 2 kids, a daughter and a son. Started with a paper company, worked his way up from the bottom to become the secretary. Then he moved over to a bank where he went from secretary to vice president to director. And then by 1932, he was hired at Northwest Mutual Life Insurance. And within 15 years was president of that company too. His son wrote a book about his father in which he stressed the fact that his dad, really in the life insurance business, your only real currency was integrity, honesty, and transparency. And those were the things that the man lived by. By 1958, just before he was ready to retire, the Northwest Mutual Company was building a ship, and they decided to name it for him. And the day the ship was launched, arguably one of the happiest days in the man's life. He was really happy to have the ship named after him. He enjoyed taking trips on the ship. He'd take his son with him. His wife didn't necessarily want to go. She didn't like going and playing boat. But he certainly did. He took many trips when he got the opportunity to do that. At the time, it was, of course, the largest vessel on the lakes and was leased to Ogilvy Norton, who ran it through their Columbia steamship line. From the happiest day to the saddest day, the day that the Fitz went down, his son claimed that was the saddest day in his life. And when he died in 1986, not long after the Fitz had perished, he said his father was never quite the same after that. So he always considered the Fitzgerald family part of his family. So arguably, while we look at 29 lanterns here and a 30th that will be lit for all the other sailors who have been lost over time, I would argue that there was more than 29. There were 30 families who were affected by the loss of the Fitzgerald, and the 30th was indeed the family of Edmund Fitzgerald, a man himself and the rest of his family. One of the things we do here is take a few moments to recall not only the men of the Fitzgerald, but all of the men who we've lost, all the men who worked to bring their ships and their shipmates home and didn't make it over time. Thousands, tens of thousands of men we're talking. I would like to point out that Ham Johnson is here. Ham Johnson's father was the cook on the Edmund Fitzgerald. And if you get a chance, I'm looking into a light so I can't see, but if you get it, there we go, I see it over here. If you get a chance to talk to Ham, it's nice to have a member of the family, that family of 30, here tonight. Thank you very much for coming. Take a moment, enjoy it, and then we'll see you inside. Lee Murdoch will get started in just a few moments.
Get a ship downbound.
And we've asked them to salute. Let's see if they do.
The custom of blessing roses started in July of 1701, when the second-in-command officer under Cadillac, Alfonso Del presented his wife with roses on the birth of her child. Close to these waters, but he said to her, "Nella rosa y sin espina." There was never a beautiful rose without strong thorns. Lord of hosts, tonight we ask you to give us peace and comfort. We feel the grief and pain of remembering the great losses of life. Keep us ever mindful of the joy of rebirth when we're all gathered into your nearer presence. We ask you to bless these roses and these waters. Amen.